All right, let's talk about Trang. They're a massive player in the global rubber game, but man, they just had a really tough quarter. We're going to dig into how a company this big can have its fortunes just flip on a dime, seemingly overnight. Okay, so this is really the heart of the matter, right? How on earth do you go from a profit of over 500 million baht to a loss of almost 850 million? I mean, that's not just a dip, that's a complete 180. To really get what's going on, we've got to look at the story behind these huge numbers.
So, to really wrap our heads around this massive swing, we're going to break it down. Think of it like a three-act play. Act 1 is the headline, what the big numbers are screaming at us. Then we've got Act 2, the diagnosis, where we'll pop the hood and see what actually went wrong. And finally, Act 3, the prognosis. What's the company's game plan to turn things around?
Okay, let's kick things off with Act 1, the headline. Before we can even think about the why, we have to get a really clear picture of the what. These are the big, flashing red light numbers from Trang's Q3.
And the first hit, it's a doozy. Revenue. It just cratered, down by nearly a third. And to put that in real terms, we're talking about a drop of over 10 billion baht in sales in just 1 year. That is a huge hole to try and climb out of. So, you're probably asking, why did the revenue fall off a cliff? Well, it's actually pretty straightforward. They just sold way less rubber. The amount of stuff they actually shipped out the door dropped by pretty much the exact same percentage, almost 32%. So this isn't just a story about prices changing. This points to a real drop in demand, probably tied to the wider economy slowing down, especially in big rubber-using industries like car manufacturing. And here's where it gets even more painful. It's that domino effect, right? With sales volume tanking, their profitability just got absolutely hammered. We're talking about gross profit. That's the money they make before paying for things like offices and salaries. It collapsed by almost 74%. So what does that tell us? It tells us they weren't just selling less, they were also making a lot less money on everything they did sell.
All right, so that's the what. Now it's time for Act 2, the diagnosis. We've seen all the symptoms, right? Revenue's down, sales volume is down, profit is way down. So now, let's play doctor and figure out the root cause. What was the disease that caused the sudden collapse?
To really get to the bottom of this, you've got to understand what Trang is. I mean, look at this breakdown. The vast majority of their business, over 70%, is in natural rubber, things like TSR and RSS, which are basically different types of rubber that go into stuff like car tires. Yeah, the glove business is a nice piece, but at its core, this is a rubber company. And when your main business gets a cold, the whole company is going to get a nasty flu.
And honestly, this table right here, this tells you almost everything you need to know. Just look at the two sides of the business. The glove division, it had a fantastic quarter. I mean, gross profit was up almost 50%. But, and this is a huge but, that good news was completely swallowed up by the absolute train wreck in their main rubber business. Profits there just fell off a cliff, down nearly 87%. The little bit of extra cash from gloves was like using a bucket to bail out the Titanic. The massive hole in the rubber business is the reason the whole company posted a loss.
Okay, so with revenue in freefall, you'd hope they were at least keeping a tight grip on their costs, right? Now, at first glance, this chart might look a little concerning. It shows their overhead costs, that's SG&A, went up as a percentage of sales. But hold on, that's a bit misleading. The only reason that percentage went up is because the sales number got so much smaller. If you look at the actual dollars and cents, they cut their spending by more than 15%. So yeah, management was doing the right thing. They were cutting costs, but the revenue problem was it was too big. It was a tidal wave they couldn't stop.
So we've stared at the ugly numbers, we've diagnosed the core problem. Now for the final act, the prognosis. What's the plan? How does Trang get out of this mess? Let's dive into their strategy and also take a look at the challenges from the outside world, the headwinds that they're sailing into.
Well, the company is making a very clear, very public bet on the future. They're basically saying their path forward isn't just about making more rubber, it's about making better rubber. Specifically, rubber that's sustainable and completely traceable. They believe this isn't just some feel-good environmental thing. They see it as a hard-nosed business advantage that their biggest customers are starting to demand.
And a huge part of what's driving this strategy is this new regulation coming out of Europe, the EUDR. And believe me, this thing is a potential game changer. What it means is the EU is basically saying, hey, if you want to sell your rubber here, you have to prove with hard data that it didn't come from a deforested area. Now, for a lot of companies, that is a massive, massive headache. But for a company that can actually do it, it's a golden opportunity.
So how are they gearing up for this? They're going all in on tech. They're building this whole ecosystem, using apps to link up directly with the farmers on the ground, using GPS in their factories to track every single batch of raw material. The strategy is brilliant, really. They're trying to take this big, scary regulation and turn it into their secret weapon by creating a premium, fully compliant product that their competitors just can't match.
And hey, let's not forget about the glove business. Remember, that was the one bright spot in the last quarter. So their glove company, SGT, has a really clear 4-point plan to keep that momentum going. It's all about getting smarter with things like automation and AI, making their factories more efficient, selling to more countries, and creating more of those high-end specialty gloves that bring in better profits. But you know, a great plan is one thing. Executing it in the real world is another. Trang doesn't operate in a bubble, and they're facing some serious external forces, some major headwinds that could make this turnaround pretty tricky. One of the biggest challenges is just the nature of the rubber business itself. It's seasonal. You've got peak seasons where there's tons of rubber, and then you have low seasons like the wintering season when the trees produce less. That means less supply, which usually pushes prices up. It's this constant up and down cycle that they always have to be prepared for.
And here's a twist. Even that big smart bet they're making on sustainability, it's facing its own uncertainty. They're pouring all this money into being ready for those new EU rules, and now there's talk in Europe of pushing the deadline back by a whole year. Imagine being the company. That kind of regulatory whiplash makes it incredibly difficult to plan and to know if your big investments are going to pay off when you expect them to.
So, let's wrap this all up. What's the bottom line here? Well, this terrible quarter wasn't about one single thing going wrong. It was a total perfect storm. Their main rubber business got slammed by a double whammy, fewer sales and lower profits on those sales. So what's the comeback plan? They're leaning into their successful glove business while making this huge bet that the future of rubber isn't about being the cheapest, but about being the most sustainable and traceable.
And that really leaves us with the big, lingering question, doesn't it? Trang is essentially betting the farm on the idea that sustainability isn't just a buzzword, it's a business strategy. They think it can protect them from market chaos and let them charge more for their product. But in a world that is this volatile, with rules changing all the time, can being green really lead to stability and more green in the bank? It's a fascinating question, and I guess we'll just have to watch and see.